Hello, everyone. Good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you're chiming in. I'm Tulio Sergusa, and this is another episode of Dojo Live, a special time today at 9 a.m. to accommodate our guests who are tuning in and broadcasting from London. Today, I'm joined by Kim Lantis in Hermosillo, Mexico, and Carlos Ponce in Cuernavaca, Mexico. Hi, guys. Welcome back.
Good morning.
This is the last show for this week, but it's not the least show. In fact, we're talking about something really important that's been impacting a lot of people, especially in the past 15 months during the worldwide pandemic. This idea of people stretching to the point of burnout. Let's find a way not to do that. That's what we're going to talk about today. Maybe there's a way to thrive and be fearless without burning out. So our guests today are Pete Harvey and Searsha Sadek, who are with ProQuoAI. Pete is the Chief Technology Officer and Chief Product Officer, and Searsha is the Head of Growth for the company. Thanks for joining us today, guys, and thanks for being with us all the way from the UK.
Thanks for having us.
Lovely to be here.
So before we dive into the conversation, there's so much that we can unpack and learn from this. I'm really excited to have this conversation. I know my co-hosts are as well. Let's get to know you guys a little bit. If you could just take a few minutes to introduce yourself to the audience, we'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure, I guess I'll go first. My name is Pete. I've always been interested in building things and creating things. That's the kind of thread that runs through everything I've done. I started my career as a physicist, particularly an experimental physicist, and ice strangely became my specialist subject. I can bore you to death over a gin and tonic about the ice that's in it. I kind of finished doing that and had a brief time in branding agencies. I decided I never wanted to look at maths ever again after physics, so headed into branding and then decided actually I quite liked maths. And I joined a kind of skunk works team, a big management consultancy, where we were building and creating products that automated expertise, really. That's what I've kind of spent the last few years focusing on. Outside of work, if you ever find me outside of the office, you'll find me at the skate park. I'm a keen BMXer, and I'm often covered in bruises, scrapes, and other things that the rest of the office find horrifying.
Like really big scrape.
I love it. I was a BMXer too, but you kind of stopped as you get older. You're keeping going. That's awesome. All right. That's a whole nother conversation. Anybody else had this vision of the Frozen movie with the guys chopping the ice when you were talking about being a
That's what it's like going for a drink with Pete.
No, I didn't.
I got you know what I'm talking about. You've seen that.
I got the day after tomorrow got in my head with their drilling for the shafts. Man.
We've seen that movie so many times I can recite every word per word of the show. Okay, so Searsha, tell us a little bit about you.
I mean, I started out sort of studying psychology because I've always been, the thread I suppose for me is how people think and how people feel. I've always just been fascinated by it. Like, why do some people run towards a disaster and some people run away? Why am I addicted to shopping? That's kind of a personal one. Why am I a victim of the industry I work in? And just why people do what they do. So I studied psychology, which then kind of naturally led me into strategy and advertising. So trying to understand how to take what is a sort of a commercial objective and turn it into a creative brief that you can make an idea from, and what we kind of need to play on to make people excited and feel like they want to be building a relationship with a brand. I suppose that's kind of the work stuff that led me to where I am today. But I suppose outside work, I'm a cultural mix. I'm Irish Egyptian, which I've only ever met one other Irish Egyptian, and I was a bit weird with him. I just kept yelling, "I'm Irish Egyptian" at him. And other than that, I just do kickboxing, really. I like to kick stuff and box.
Awesome. All right. So we got a physicist and a psychologist. It's going to be a really interesting conversation for sure.
Absolutely.
All right. So let's introduce the topic. Oh, before we introduce the topic, let's learn what ProQuoAI is all about.
What is ProQuoAI?
We got so enthralled with you guys, we forgot about the company. What's ProQuoAI? Tell us all about it, please.
So ProQuoAI is a brand management tool, as you said. It exists to help marketers make the right decisions with their marketing to grow. We've got all sorts of marketing experience here in the building. We've had people who've built brands, people who've started brands, people who have worked within brands. And we all kind of identified the same problem, which is that there are so many fractured solutions for brands at the moment. You get data from here, data from there, information from here, and there's so much. There's no way that one human can actually take all of that, synthesize it, and turn it into the right thing to do. So we created a solution that brings all of those things into one place and gives you a custom action plan for your brand.
Wow, you guys disrupted the agency business, the agency in a box. I love it. All right, let's dig in and learn all that we can today from today's conversation and topic. Carlos, please, let's kick it off.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tulio. And yeah, before I announce the topic, I have to confess, Searsha and Pete, that it's very refreshing to see you guys in an office. Okay, it's like after so long, it feels extremely, at least for me, extremely refreshing. I mean, I think congratulations on that one. Just like a small hints of back into some kind of normality. So there's a question about the
and
topic.
they high-fived. They touched hands.
Yeah, of course. You know,
Ties our hands now, but we did high five.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so, well, there's a question up in the air, which is, in the face of the unknown, how can you ensure your team continues to thrive and push boundaries without burning out? And I'm sure that this question, a lot of people might want to have answered. That's why our guests are here today to answer that question. And the topic that they chose for today's conversation is building a fearless team from scratch. So let's kick it off. Pete, Searsha, why did you choose this particular topic, or why did you feel it was relevant for today's day and age? Thank you.
I suppose, I mean, apart from the fact that it's a topic that's on the top of everyone's minds, what with the pandemic happening recently, and all of us working from home, as you've said, we've only recently come back to the office. We found it increasingly challenging to sort of look after one another and make sure that no one ever approaches burnout and that we're all safe. And one of the things, and I think we do that really well here in our culture. And I think one of the reasons is because of the culture that we've built. We also went from being, 5 people about 2 years ago, just over 2 years ago, to now being closer to 100. And throughout that, we've still managed to keep that. And that was, over the pandemic. So we had people joining remotely. We, couldn't, see someone's face to see if they were actually doing okay that day. So I think it's just been really top of mind for us as the business has been scaling and growing, making sure that all of our people are safe and looked after and that we're all being productive, but are as happy as we can be.
I guess to add to that, I think it's a topic that's kind of skirted around often in building businesses, I feel. I think a lot of the stories you read are the real success stories. You only hear the positive side of things. And I think it's important to face up to the fact that things are really hard. And you have to do a lot of thinking to make sure that teams do continue to push boundaries, I guess.
Excellent. Thank you, Pete and Searsha. Okay, Tulio, I think I had a question. So please.
Yeah, you said something that caught my attention because of our culture, and you've created an environment where people have the opportunity to thrive, push the boundaries without burning out. Can you tell us a little bit about what is it about your culture that enables you to do that? What have you guys created that's enabling you to do that?
It's a big question, Tulio, and it's a multifaceted answer. I mean, fundamentally, we understand culture to be a living, breathing thing. It's not sort of a statement that we put on a page. It's an active thing that we are all constantly engaging in. And I think because of that, there's so many different ways that it expresses itself. I mean, one is that we recruit a diverse range of people, not just sort of the usual ways of being diverse, like gender and race and orientation and all that kind of stuff, but also a diversity of values and thoughts and approaches and skills. And what that means is that we have a team which is very, very different from one another, and we have to find ways to bind us together. So one thing that we do is have a universal vision and goal, which makes us all pull in the same direction, but also a culture of tolerance and listening, which means that you approach everything as though someone's got something to contribute.
Love it.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, you're talking about building a fearless team from scratch. I actually have a two-part question. If you could define for us what fearlessness means, at least in the context of ProQuoAI, and what is your process that you utilize to go about building that team from scratch?
It's a good question. I think in our business, we talk about fearless as being confident enough to tackle important unsolved problems. And I think that's why the kind of diversity of thought that Searsha talked about is really important to us, because you kind of need this mix, I think, of people who have never worked in the problem space before, because those people can see things in different ways and look at things in different ways. But we've also been very focused in building our team to make sure that we have people that kind of act as wayfinders, people that may have worked in the space before and are not encumbered with kind of past solutions, but instead can say, this is an area where you can really innovate. This is an area where we should focus our efforts, versus saying, guys, this has been solved before. Here are the three options. This is a quick shortcut. It's unimportant. Let's not go down that rabbit hole. Stay on the path.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the stuff we tackle is really scary. Like, it's stuff that you sort of, if you look at it directly, you sort of start backing away slowly. So you've got to look at its feet first and work out how it stands, and then build the body up. So I think it's a culture of approaching things together and not ever letting the giantness of the problem intimidate you.
Searsha, I have a question for you specifically, so I hope you can help me clear that. As a psychologist, my question to you would be, we're discussing building a fearless team, okay? So when I read the word fearless, automatically logically I think of fears, okay? So my question to you as a psychologist that made you decide on this topic would be, what sort of fears have you identified across the board on people, and maybe people who are starting to work from home for the first time in their lives, or some other situation that might elicit fear in a way, and how can these people who are starting to experience that fear, how can they start to overcome it? What are the self-realizations that these people need to be aware of in order to overcome those fears? And so that's my question to you.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting one. What fears have we identified and are trying to tackle? I think there's all the usual sort of human fears that come in at work, right? There's a fear of not being heard, of not being appreciated, of not being valued. Those are all kind of the usual things that we all experience at one point or another at work. Obviously, the goal is to minimize those always. I think what's been really hard about the pandemic is that those things have all kind of had oil poured on them, because you don't have the usual feedback mechanisms that you have at work. You're not sitting next to someone. Like, if I felt insecure one day, I could look at Pete and be like, I'm not sure about that. And he'd go, it's okay, Sish. We'll work it out. And, I'll feel relaxed by that. And that's kind of a micro interaction, which leads me to feel more confident and more safe about what I'm about to do. Having all of that taken away, you're essentially living in a sterile environment that doesn't have any feedback mechanisms. So it's very hard to be supported.
Right.
So what we tried to build in throughout our sort of fractured interactions as the pandemic continued was feedback mechanisms in whatever way we could. Our teams hung out we brought in stand-up. So every team hung out for 15 minutes a day. Every team ran it differently depending on who was in it. You know, my teams actually mostly just chatted and talked about the weather, and you know, it was just a time to be together. That's not how Pete runs them. So I'm a bit embarrassed. That's what we do in them. But it's just a way to make sure that you get a read on everyone and can reassure people where it needs to happen, celebrate where celebration needs to happen, commiserate where commiseration needs to happen. How I think people can do that in future is find your own pod, you know, find the people that do reassure you, whether it's in work or whether it's not, and make sure that you're getting those feedback mechanisms as regularly as you can, even if they're tiny. I think it makes such a difference.
Thank you so much, Searsha.
I think for me, one of my biggest fears that I've experienced for this past year and a half is not being good enough, right? On top of the pandemic, transitioning into a new role, same company, new role, but feeling like I just can't. Like I cannot be the me that I would want to be at work because I'm trying to juggle so much more at the same time. So what would you say to those people who might feel like I feel? I think what I'm asking for would be tips and ideas on how to sort of try to time management, strike that balance, but also going back to the feedback that you're mentioning, how can we provide actual like constructive feedback, even if it's negative feedback, and how can we better respond to that as individuals as well?
I think that's a great question. We often talk in our company about accepting darkness and light. I think that the fear of perhaps not being good enough is often rooted in the fear of failure. And we try and draw that out into the open. So we, you know, in any growth journey, it's, you know, really bumpy and there are ups and downs, and we try really hard to celebrate every up. But we also make a huge point of airing the darkness, the downs, and talking about what went wrong, why, what we've learned from it. It's not a blame thing. It's more a celebration that if those things are happening, it means we're learning. And I think that's what we try to foster within our teams, is be open with one another, have an authentic interaction. If you're having a tough day, and I think we've all had tough days over the last couple of years, signal it, signpost it, be open about it, I guess.
I think the other thing I'd say, Kim, is you asked there, like, how do you give that feedback to people? You know, how do you know if you're doing a good job? At ProQuo, as a business, we believe in relationships. So we believe that brands do better when they understand the relationship they have with consumers and can deliver on it. That's a core fundamental belief that we have. And so we also apply it to our people. We have a system of feedback which happens, I think, every 6 months formally, where we use those we call them the 16 drivers. They're emotional things, they're rational things, they're sort of personality-based things and behavior-based things. And we use those 16 drivers that we use on brands and on categories on our people. We do it really nicely, by the way. We're not like mean to people. But it gives you a granular understanding of where you're doing less well and also where people think you're doing really well. And we find that it has a really, really positive effect, because most people feel really good about most people we employ here. And the feedback that they get that is more negative or areas for them to focus on are granular, and they're given really specific feedback. So we apply the 16 drivers that we have to understand brands to our people.
Wow, that's brilliant. So just to recap real quick, I heard a few things that really resonated. One was this idea of creating an environment where people feel like they belong and there's meaning behind what they're doing and they can have an impact, which is the idea behind not being afraid to fail, right? So I also heard a lot that you guys create psychological safety for people. In order for people to feel fearless, to stretch, they have to feel safe, right? So what's the structure like that enables that? Because in many organizations that are very hierarchical or command and control, even in certain countries that have class systems or caste systems, that's more challenging for someone to come into an organization and feel safe to just openly express or give ideas, especially if there's rank and file kind of structures. What's allowed you guys to remove those barriers, if you've put anything in place in terms of the structure or the organization that creates that safety for people? What's working?
I think we kind of focus on two things there. So we focus on talent density, which is talked about a lot, making sure that you have really good people, and you know that when you look left and you look right, you can trust them to do their job. No matter how kind of high ranking or not they may be, there's this level of trust. But we think it's more important than talent density is what we think of as talent intimacy. So we spend a lot of time communicating between teams, get together, and one of the teams within the business presents what they've been working on. Today's was a really complex topic of building an engineering data lake. But we feel it's important that everybody in the organization, whether they're in sales or operations, understands what that team is doing, because they can see how they can interface with it, I suppose. In terms of structure, I think we're fairly flat.
Our CEO refers to it as the tree of tyranny, which is an ironic name, because essentially he's the boss and everyone knows that. And there's a couple of people under him who, are the secondary bosses. And then it's kind of everyone should feel free to have a voice. Everyone's should speak their mind. Everyone is equal in their opinions underneath that. We obviously have very clear reporting lines. No one's confused about, what their job is or who they have to answer to. But in terms of the spirit that we approach it with, it's basically him, a couple of others, and then the rest of us underneath.
Yeah, sometimes these trees can be hard to manage. I wanted to go back to what you were talking about with what I understood to be more of a cultural add versus a cultural fit. And especially, I think, Searsha, with your Irish Egyptian background, I think this would be a very interesting one as well. And that's about differences cross culturally, not just the company culture, but when we've got this melting pot of people who come from different backgrounds, different places, particularly with the negative feedback that we have to provide, right? It's my understanding, and this is where the psychology, I think, comes in as well, that there's indirect ways of doing this and direct ways of doing this. And when we say something, it could be interpreted very differently. So maybe in the United States, and when we'll be like, oh, and by the way, right? That, oh, and by the way, is actually that transition to this is what the negative feedback conversation is actually about. This is what's actually important. But someone who comes from this more negative or direct background is probably like, oh, this really isn't that important because they're looking to what we're exactly saying. Have you come across any of this, or how do you make or cross this bridge of what I'm actually saying, or people who are more used to just saying it like it is, and that's fine, it's water off the duck's back, or in other cultures, this could really hurt my feelings. And so any tips on that regard?
I mean, absolutely. We have offices in New York, London, and Johannesburg. So just even starting there, you've got a lot of cultural clashes. Within each office, we've got lots of different sort of international identities as well, or national identities. I think what I'd say, and I'm sure you've got an interesting answer too, Pete, is that because we've built a culture of listening and tolerance, and always the onus is on you to understand what the other person means. It means that you kind of take what people say and you put the context around it and try to understand why they're saying it. So we actually don't experience that much clash of cultures or anything, because we also are experiencing so many other intersections. Like, I would say that the understanding between a data science and a marketer is more difficult than the understanding between an American and an English person, but we make that work. So what problem is the English American thing?
Right. And then in London, you always have tea time at 10 a.m. in the morning, which is nothing, which is not really tea time. I learned it wasn't tea time.
I'm offending you with my coffee right now. Oh, sorry.
Everything is great over a pint. So yeah, that was a learning cultural shock. Oh, it's tea time. It's like, oh, beer's coming out at 10 in the morning. I'm like, okay, that was an adjustment. So Anyway, it sounds as though you guys have chosen. You said something earlier, intimacy. Relationships over transactions, right? Because it's so easy to get focused on transactions and actions and to-dos and goals, which doesn't necessarily align sometimes with purpose. And purpose requires people to collaborate, and that is key to having good relationships. So, what are some of the things you guys do? You said you use some of the tools that you help marketers with fostering relationships with their customers. You're using some of those technology or methodologies in-house. Can you give us a glimpse into how are you helping people build those relationships, build those bridges together?
Absolutely. I mean, we always talk about the importance of celebrating. I think I'm answering the question here, but celebrating whatever you can, whenever you can. Using the positivity to bring each other together, as well as the failure. I think what really helps to unite us and build those relationships is having a common goal. I mean, we are doing something as a company that is completely new. We're creating a new category. We've got a new vision. We want to disrupt the areas of strategy, creation, and monitoring, and bring it all together. And I think all of us believing in that vision, and all of us also being co-owners of the business, really helps us to put our shoulders to the wheel and trust one another and believe that we're all here to make a difference and to kind of pull together. Does that answer your question?
Oh, absolutely.
And it's working, right? I think you mentioned going from 5 to 100 in 2 years, 20 times growth in 2 years, something like that.
Well, I heard the key word, co-ownership, right? It's the key. A few of us from my organization have actually started a movement. It's called radicalpurpose.org, and we talk a great deal about you can have co-leadership, you can have self-managed environment, but if you don't have co-ownership, you really never get to that place of true intimacy. And so congratulations for achieving that. We're coming up on time. You guys have any follow-up questions to that before we do our final wrap-up questions? So the last question we want to ask you is, what's this journey been like? You're disrupting a marketplace, right? You're introducing tools that normally people would go to agencies for that kind of work, right? You'd hire an agency to do this kind of work that you're not putting into a box, into a platform. What's that journey been like, disrupting a marketplace, going through the process of changing even the dynamics on how you're building your business and the culture that you've created? What's that been like for you guys?
I mean, I think we mentioned it earlier. It's been a series of ups and downs, right? I mean, I think the ups have been trying to find a proposition that fits. There's a moment where I think that locks in with the market and people actually understand what you're talking about. And they go, yes, you're solving a problem that we need solving. The ups for me are always the late nights with the pizza boxes, trying to ship something really difficult that you've been working on as a team for months. Kind of having solved hard problems, I guess, is always one of the ups, and we've got plenty of those. I think from my perspective, the downs is when things don't work.
Says the chief product officer.
We wouldn't be doing our jobs if we didn't place some bets in the product that didn't pay off. So that's always a downside, but the upside then is going out and speaking to your customers and figuring out what tweaks you need to make it actually useful. I think we learned that remote work is hard. That's been difficult. We love all being together. We think it's really important to be in an office together if you're innovating, if you're creating. So the last couple of years have been really difficult.
I think for me, what I've learned, which we haven't sort of experienced before, I don't think, is the value of seeing, this is going to maybe sound a bit lame, but seeing the product actually work and seeing it build value for our customers. Like having someone just say, oh, that's crazy. Do you do all of that? Or like someone saying, oh yeah, I used it to do this. It's such an offhand thing for them. But for us, it's like, oh my God, all of it was worth it. Like we've actually made a difference to your day and like we've made your brand better. I think we all get a really, really big kick out of customer feedback. Maybe we are all really lame, but like just knowing that the product works, I think makes it all validated, I guess.
Pete, Searsha, we're about to wrap up, but before we go, I'd like to ask you something about your company culture. And there might be people out there who could be watching and might want to be even, come work for you at some point. So what would you say to these people in terms of what's important for you when you're looking for the greatest talent, the best that you can get your hands on? What would you say to these people who might want to come work for you to actually elicit them to submit their resume for consideration? What's important for you when you look for people?
I think you said it earlier, Kim. Actually, a cultural ad. We've worked really, really hard on our recruitment process. We have a 3-stage interview where we do culture, competence, and I've forgotten the final C, but it's with our CEO. Mm-hmm. And essentially, before anything else, we work out what you have to bring to our culture, because here we want everyone to celebrate, and express themselves. So even if you're an SDR in the sales team, we want you to bring a flavor of who you are to what you're doing. If you're an engineer, bring your flavor to the things that you build. So that cultural ad, what you have to bring, to give, to add to what we already do is really important. And then, of course, competence. Are you good at what you do? We don't overlook that one at all. And then our CEO does the final sort of audit. He meets absolutely everybody that joins the company to make sure that we're all going to, get on and be productive, and that person is going to fit with us and add to us.
Yeah, I think to echo that, we look for people that are high performance but low friction. We look for people who are courageous, I guess, but also human. We're not all wearing a suit of armor to work every day. Mm-hmm. We look for people that are transgressive. We're trying to do something new and different and innovative. And we look for people that want to be part of a close team. There's a lot of remote warriors out there who kind of want to work on their own, and that's cool and that's great, but that's not what we are. We want to work together, pull together, and build something special together, really.
Great. Thank you, guys.
Who wouldn't want to be part of that? Well, it's been great to have you guys as our guests. We've learned a lot about what it takes to build a fearless team, creating psychological safety, an environment where people could be themselves and express themselves, take risks together, work together as a team, and celebrate the differences.
Yeah.
So that's the key thing, is celebrate the differences instead of demonizing them. We all could learn a lot from celebrating our differences.
For those naysayers, 20 times the growth in 2 years. So
exactly. So it's been great to have you guys with us. We'll have to keep up with your progress as the time goes by. Maybe have you guys come back in a year or so. Stay with us as we go off the air in just a second. Join us again on Monday at 12 p.m. Pacific. We have the recap show. We'll recap 3 shows this week in 10 minutes. So join us on Monday at 12 p.m. Pacific. If you want to participate in the recap show, you're a fan who wants to participate and be one of the squares here, the Brady Brunch squares, let us know. Just post a comment where you're watching us. I'd like to participate. And we'll invite you to be part of the recap show. We'd love to do that. Carlos, what else we got coming up next week?
Wow. Well, we have another full week, Tulio, and Tuesday we'll be speaking with Vishal Sunak, the co-founder and CEO of Link Squares. The topic is going to be AI and contracts, elevating the legal team. So that's on Tuesday. Then on Wednesday, the conversation will be with Ade Adeyemo, the founder of Joko, Joko. And it's a digital music streaming platform. And the topic is going to be alternative business models in today's creator economy. That's on Wednesday. And then finally on Thursday, the conversation will be with Eric Paul, He's the CEO of Axiom. It's a 3D modeling platform, which I don't have the topic yet, but it should be as interesting as all of our great Dojo Live interviews. So we have a full week right here on Dojo Live, 12 p.m. Pacific. So join us, folks, and remember, be safe. Thank you, everyone, and thanks our guests, of course.
Thank you very much for having us. It's been great.
Cheers.